Commander Park Jin-woo stood on the bridge of the human ship called Harmony, his hands gripping the metal railing so tight his knuckles turned white. Through the massive viewing window in front of him, space looked like a nightmare come to life. Two enormous alien fleets floated in the darkness, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. The ships stretched for miles in every direction, their hulls gleaming with weapons that could turn entire planets into dust. On one side were the Zenthari Empire ships, looking like giant floating crystals that caught and reflected starlight in rainbow patterns. These weren't beautiful decorations, though. Each crystal point was a weapon capable of cutting through asteroids like paper. The Zenthari had been fighting for 300 years, and their ships showed it. Battle scars covered their surfaces, and their formations moved with the cold precision of a species that had forgotten what peace looked like. Facing them were the Kithion collective vessels, and these ships made Park's skin crawl just looking at them. They looked alive, like massive sea creatures pulled from the deepest ocean trenches and thrown into space. Their hulls pulsed with organic rhythms, and tentacle-like extensions reached out between ships, connecting them in a web of living metal and flesh. The Kithion fought as one mind controlling thousands of bodies, and their ships reflected this unity in their disturbing beauty. Lieutenant Kim So-min, a young woman barely out of the academy, sat at her control station with sweat beading on her forehead. Her fingers danced across holographic displays, showing energy readings that made no sense to human science. The numbers kept climbing higher and higher, well past anything their instruments were designed to measure. "Sir," Kim said, her voice shaking slightly, "both fleets are charging their biggest weapons. These readings are off the charts. If they fire those things, the explosion will be so big it'll destroy everything within 50 light-years of here." Park felt his stomach drop. 50 light-years meant hundreds of star systems, billions of planets. Some of those planets had life on them. Entire civilizations that had nothing to do with this ancient war, but would die anyway when the shockwave reached them. Lee Hyun-sik, Park's diplomatic assistant, stood near the back of the bridge, looking like he might be sick. Lee was normally calm and collected, the kind of man who could negotiate trade deals while under fire. But now his face was pale white, and his hands trembled as he held a data pad showing casualty estimates. "Commander," Lee whispered barely, loud enough to hear, "we're about to watch the end of 2 entire civilizations. Trillions of people are going to die in the next few minutes, and there's absolutely nothing we can do to stop it." The human ship Harmony was tiny compared to the alien war fleets surrounding them. If the Zenthari ships looked like floating cities, then Harmony was like a small house. If the Kithion vessels were giant sea monsters, then the human ship was a minnow swimming between whales. Earth had only made contact with galactic civilization 5 years ago, and humanity was still considered a baby species by the ancient empires, now preparing to destroy each other. Park walked to the center of the bridge, where a 3-dimensional map showed the battle formations. Red dots represented Zenthari ships, blue dots showed Kithion forces, and one tiny green dot marked their position. The green dot looked pathetic, lost in a sea of military might that could crack moons in half. Through the communication system, they could hear the final threats being exchanged between the fleet commanders. The Zenthari spoke in crystal-clear tones that sounded like wind chimes, while the Kithion communicated in harmonized voices that overlapped like a deadly choir. Neither side was backing down. Neither side was willing to negotiate. After 3 centuries of war, they had decided that if one of them couldn't win, then both would die. Park's crew looked at him with desperate hope, as if he might have some miracle solution hidden away. But what could humanity possibly do? They had no superweapons, no advanced technology, no political influence. They were observers, witnesses to the end of galactic civilization, helpless to change anything about the approaching catastrophe that would reshape the galaxy forever. The final moments before the battle felt like holding your breath underwater. Park could hear the alien fleet commanders making their last threats through the communication system. The Zenthari admiral's voice rang like breaking glass as he promised to turn every Kithion world into frozen wasteland. The Kithion collective responded with thousands of voices speaking as one, swearing to consume every Zenthari crystal ship and add their technology to the swarm. Park's hands were sweating as he watched the weapon readings climb higher. In less than 2 minutes, both sides would fire their planet-killer weapons at the same time. The resulting explosion would be like setting off a supernova in the middle of populated space. Everything would die. Everything. That's when Park made the craziest decision of his life. "All hands, this is the commander," Park said over the ship's intercom. "Activate every communication array we have. I want us broadcasting on every single frequency in the galaxy." His bridge crew stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Lieutenant Kim So-min's fingers hesitated over her controls. "Sir, if we interfere with their battle communications, they'll shoot us down without thinking twice." Park walked to the main communication console and placed his hand on the activation switch. "Do it now, that's an order." The Harmony's communication systems came alive with a sound like electronic thunder. Every radio dish, every quantum transmitter, every piece of communication equipment on the ship began broadcasting at maximum power. The signal was so strong it drowned out everything else in the local space. "This is Commander Park Jin-woo of the human vessel Harmony, representing Earth and all of humanity." Park spoke into the main transmitter, his voice now echoing across both alien fleets simultaneously. "I hereby claim the Nexus Point and all surrounding space as sovereign territory of the human species, under the authority granted by Article 247 of the Galactic Accord." The effect was immediate and shocking. Both massive alien fleets suddenly stopped moving. Weapon systems that had been charging for the final strike powered down slightly as confused alien commanders tried to process what they had just heard. For the first time in 300 years of warfare, something completely unexpected had happened. Communications Officer Choi Min-jun turned in his chair to stare at Park, with his mouth hanging open. "Commander, with all due respect, have you completely lost your mind? We don't have the military power to back up a territorial claim. One Zenthari cruiser could destroy our entire ship with a single shot." Park smiled, and for the first time in hours, he didn't look terrified anymore. Instead, he looked like a man who had just figured out the answer to an impossible puzzle. "Min-jun, you're absolutely right. We don't have military power. We can't fight either of these fleets. We can't threaten them or force them to do anything." He turned to look at Dr. Yoon Da-hee, the cultural specialist who had been quietly working at her station throughout the crisis. She was a small woman with bright eyes who had spent her entire career studying alien civilizations. Now she looked up at Park, with understanding dawning on her face. "But we don't need military power," Park continued, nodding at Dr. Yoon. "We have something much more powerful than weapons. We have something that neither of these ancient civilizations has ever encountered before." Dr. Yoon's fingers were already flying across her control panel, activating systems that had nothing to do with weapons or shields. "Beginning deployment now, Commander," she said with a grin that looked almost mischievous. The Harmony began launching small devices from its cargo bays. They looked like simple communications satellites, the kind of basic technology that any spacefaring civilization might use. Dozens of them spread out around the Nexus Point in a carefully planned pattern, taking positions between the two massive fleets. The alien commanders were not amused by this interruption. The Zenthari Admiral's crystal-clear voice cut through space like a knife. "Human vessel, you will withdraw immediately, or be destroyed as collateral damage. You have 30 seconds to comply." The Kithion Collective spoke with their 1,000 voices in perfect harmony. "Small human ship, you are insignificant. Move away or be consumed. We show mercy only because you are young and foolish." Park looked around his bridge at his small crew. These were good people, brave people who had volunteered for a dangerous mission to observe alien warfare. Now they were about to either save the galaxy or get vaporized trying. Every single one of them was scared, but none of them suggested retreating. "Dr. Yoon," Park said quietly, "are your devices in position?" "Yes, Commander, all satellites are active and ready. Then let's show these ancient civilizations what humanity is really made of." The moment Dr. Yoon's finger hit the activation button, something incredible happened that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. The small devices floating around the Nexus Point weren't weapons designed to destroy or shields meant to protect. They were something far more dangerous to a military operation than any gun or bomb could ever be. They were doors, doors that opened directly into the chaotic, beautiful, completely insane world of human culture. In the blink of an eye, every communication system on both alien fleets was suddenly flooded with everything humanity had ever created digitally. It wasn't just a few files or some basic information about Earth. It was everything. The entire internet streaming directly from Earth to the middle of this ancient battlefield, dumping the full scope of human creativity into the minds of species that had been focused on nothing but war for 3 centuries. Music hit the alien ships first. Classical symphonies from centuries ago mixed with modern pop songs, heavy metal guitar riffs crashed into gentle lullabies, and traditional folk music from every country on Earth played alongside electronic dance beats that could make your heart race. The Zenthari, who communicated through crystal-clear tones, suddenly found their ship speakers playing everything from opera singers hitting impossible high notes to rap artists speaking faster than their translation systems could process. But music was just the beginning. Literature from every human civilization poured through their networks. Ancient poetry that spoke of love and loss, modern novels about adventure and mystery, philosophical works that questioned the meaning of existence, and simple stories that children told each other before bedtime. The aliens found themselves reading everything from serious academic papers about quantum physics to silly jokes that made absolutely no sense, but somehow still felt funny. Then came the videos, cooking shows where humans argued passionately about the proper way to make pasta, comedy sketches where people slipped on banana peels and everyone laughed, educational programs explaining how butterflies transform from caterpillars, sports events where humans cheered wildly for people kicking balls around fields, dance videos, magic tricks, people singing in their cars, cats doing adorable things, and millions of humans just talking to cameras about their daily lives. Social media posts flooded in like a digital tsunami, humans complaining about their jobs, celebrating birthdays, sharing pictures of their food, arguing about movies, expressing political opinions, posting photos of sunsets, and documenting every tiny detail of their ordinary lives. The aliens saw humans at their most honest and unfiltered, sharing thoughts and feelings that no diplomat would ever put in an official communication. Technician Han Subin sat at his monitoring station, watching the alien fleet's responses with growing amazement. His screens showed communication traffic that looked like pure chaos. "Commander," he said, his voice filled with wonder, "their translation systems are completely overwhelmed. They're trying to process everything at once." The Zenthari ships, with their perfect crystal formations, began to lose their precise military spacing. Individual vessels started drifting slightly as their crews became distracted by what they were seeing. Zenthari warriors, trained from birth to follow orders without question, found themselves stopping in the middle of battle preparations to listen to human music that spoke to emotions they had been taught to ignore. On the Kithion ships, something even more remarkable was happening. The collective hive mind that had operated as one consciousness for thousands of years began to fragment. Individual drones started expressing personal preferences about human art, breaking away from the group, thoughts that had defined their entire existence. Some Kithion began laughing at human comedy, a sound that had never been heard on their ships before. The carefully planned battle formations that both fleets had maintained for hours started to fall apart. Ships that should have been focusing on weapon targeting were instead trying to understand why humans found cat videos so entertaining. Commanders who should have been issuing final attack orders were instead debating the meaning behind human poetry with their subordinates. Dr. Yoon watched her screens with satisfaction as data flowed both ways through the quantum relays. The aliens weren't just receiving human culture, they were responding to it, asking questions, trying to understand concepts that had no equivalent in their own civilizations. Zenthari officers were requesting more information about human concepts of individual freedom. Kithion collectives were fascinated by the idea that humans could disagree with each other and still remain friends. The most powerful military forces in the galaxy, weapons capable of destroying star systems, had been stopped cold by humanity's greatest export, the beautiful, chaotic, contradictory mess of human creativity and expression that made life worth living. What happened next was something that military historians would study for centuries, though they would never quite understand how it worked. Within just a few hours, the most disciplined fighting forces in the galaxy began to fall apart, but not because of any weapon or attack. They fell apart because they discovered something that their civilizations had forgotten existed. The simple joy of being individuals with their own thoughts and feelings. The Zenthari Empire had built their entire society around perfect order. Every warrior knew exactly what they were supposed to do, when to do it, and how to do it without question. They had been bred and trained for generations to follow commands instantly, to never doubt their superiors, and to consider emotions as weaknesses that got in the way of military efficiency. But now, as human music poured through their communication systems, something incredible started happening. A Zenthari ship captain named Valketh was listening to a human song about lost love when he suddenly stopped in the middle of giving battle orders. The melody was so beautiful and sad that it made him feel something he had never experienced before. His chest felt tight, his eyes became wet, and for the first time in his life, he understood what humans called heartbreak, even though he had never lost anyone himself. He stood on his bridge, tears streaming down his crystalline face, completely forgetting about the war. Throughout the Zenthari fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Warriors who had spent their entire lives preparing for battle were abandoning their weapon stations to gather around communication screens, trying to understand why human poetry made them feel things they didn't have words for. Some were reading love letters that humans had written to each other. Others were watching videos of human families celebrating together, and many were listening to music that spoke directly to parts of their souls they never knew existed. The Kytheon Collective faced an even more dramatic transformation. For thousands of years, they had operated as a single consciousness spread across millions of bodies. Individual thoughts were impossible because everyone shared the same mind, but human culture was like a virus that infected their collective thinking, introducing concepts that couldn't be shared because they were fundamentally personal. A Kytheon. Drone designated Unit 7429 was reading a human blog post about someone's personal struggle with choosing a career path when something extraordinary happened. For the first time in the collective's history, Unit 7429 had a thought that belonged only to them. They wondered what it would be like to make their own choices, to have their own dreams, to be responsible for their own decisions. This single, independent thought spread through the local collective like wildfire, causing other drones to start questioning everything they had accepted without thinking. Cultural analyst Im Ye-jin sat at her station aboard the Harmony, monitoring the communication traffic between the alien ships with growing amazement. Her job was to study how different cultures communicated, but she had never seen anything like this before. "Commander," she reported, barely able to contain her excitement, "the Zenthari are literally abandoning their battle stations. Entire weapon crews are gathered in common areas discussing human poetry and trying to understand what irony means." She pulled up another screen showing Kytheon communications, and the Kytheon collective is fragmenting. Individual drones are breaking away from the hive mind to express personal opinions. Some of them are arguing with each other about whether human comedy is actually funny or just confusing. The arguments spreading through both fleets were unlike anything their species had ever experienced. Zenthari officers were debating whether emotions made warriors stronger or weaker, using human examples to support both sides. Some insisted that human soldiers who fought to protect their families were more effective than those who fought for abstract ideals. Others argued that emotions made humans unpredictable and therefore dangerous in battle. On Kytheon ships, the debates were even more intense because individual opinions were a completely new concept. Drones who had shared thoughts for their entire existence suddenly found themselves disagreeing with the collective about fundamental questions. Should efficiency always come before happiness? Was it better to be part of something bigger than yourself, or to forge your own path? These discussions became so heated that some Kytheon actually split into smaller groups. each developing their own perspective on human culture. Perhaps the most remarkable change was happening to the Zenthari concept of humor. Their species had never developed comedy because their rigid society saw no purpose in it. But now Zenthari warriors were watching human comedians and experiencing something completely new: laughter. The sound of Zenthari laughter was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and soon entire ships echoed with this musical sound as crews discovered jokes, funny videos, and the simple pleasure of finding things amusing. The massive war machines that had been preparing to end galactic civilization were now completely useless, because their crews were too busy learning how to be individuals, how to feel emotions, and how to appreciate the beautiful chaos of life that humans took for granted every single day. Communications specialist Kang Ji-hoon had been monitoring alien fleet communications for years, but he had never heard anything like what was coming. Through his speakers now, instead of the usual military chatter about weapon positions and attack strategies, he was listening to something that seemed impossible: former enemies talking to each other about peace. "Commander, you need to hear this," Kang said, his voice filled with wonder. He patched the alien communications through to the bridge speakers so everyone could listen. A Zenthari fleet commander was speaking to his Kithion counterpart, but instead of threats and ultimatums, they were having what sounded like a philosophical discussion. "Your collective consciousness is fascinating," the crystalline voice said thoughtfully, "but these human stories about individual achievement make me wonder if we have been limiting our potential by demanding such rigid conformity." The Kithion response came in multiple overlapping voices that were learning to speak as individuals rather than as one mind. "We have been reading human histories about cooperation between different groups. How is it possible that humans can disagree so strongly about everything, yet still work together to build cities and explore space?" Park felt his heart racing as he realized what was happening. 3 centuries of the most bitter war in galactic history was transforming into something completely unexpected: a conversation about how to live better lives. Throughout both fleets, the changes were accelerating. Zenthari officers who had spent their entire careers following orders without question were now reading human stories about ordinary people, standing up to unfair authority. They learned about civil rights movements, about workers organizing for better treatment, about students protesting unjust laws. For the first time, many Zenthari began to question whether their rigid hierarchy was actually the best way to organize a society. 1. A Zenthari captain sent a message to his admiral that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. "Sir, I have been reading human literature about equality and justice. I believe our current system wastes the potential of lower-ranked warriors who might have valuable ideas but are never allowed to express them." The Kithion were experiencing their own revolution. Drones who had never made an independent decision were suddenly fascinated by human concepts of personal freedom and self-determination. They read blogs written by humans who had left comfortable jobs to pursue their dreams, stories about people who had overcome great challenges through individual determination, and philosophical essays about the importance of thinking for yourself. The most remarkable change was happening in how both species viewed their ancient conflict. When Zenthari warriors read human history books about wars that had ended through negotiation and compromise, they began to wonder why their own war had lasted so long without anyone ever seriously trying to make peace. When Kithion collectives studied human examples of former enemies becoming allies, they started to question whether destroying the Zenthari was really necessary for their survival. Park recognized that this was the moment when everything could change. He opened a communication channel to both fleet commanders and spoke carefully, knowing that his next words might determine the fate of the galaxy. "Honored commanders of both fleets," Park began, using the most respectful tone he could manage, "I have a proposal that might sound crazy, but I ask you to consider it. Instead of fighting over territory that will be destroyed in your battle, why not try something that humans do when we disagree: cultural exchange?" The Zenthari admiral's voice came through the speaker with curiosity rather than anger. "Explain this concept, human commander." "On Earth, when different groups have conflicts, we sometimes solve them by learning from each other instead of fighting. You could share your knowledge of crystal technology and military discipline with the Kithion. They could teach you about collective problem-solving and biological engineering. Instead of one side winning and the other losing, both sides could become stronger. What followed was the most unusual negotiation in galactic history. Fleet commanders who had been preparing to destroy each other found themselves discussing art, philosophy, and the possibility of cooperation. They debated human concepts like compromise, forgiveness, and mutual benefit. They talked about establishing cultural exchange programs, joint research projects, and peaceful ways to resolve territorial disputes. The conversations went on for days, with both sides becoming more interested in learning than fighting. Zenthari officers shared their crystal-growing techniques, while Kithion drones explained their biotechnology. They began to see each other not as enemies to be destroyed, but as potential partners with valuable knowledge to offer. When the final agreement was signed, it wasn't a surrender or a peace treaty in the traditional sense. It was something entirely new, the first tri-species cultural accord, with humanity serving as mediators and cultural guides. The document established exchange programs, joint research facilities, and peaceful methods for resolving future disputes. Park stood on his bridge, watching as former enemy ships began docking with each other, their crews eager to share music, stories, and ideas. Humanity had done something that no military force could accomplish. They had ended a 3-century war simply by being themselves, by sharing their chaotic, beautiful, utterly human way of looking at life. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't a gun or a bomb, but the simple act of showing others that there was a better way to live.